Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Coaches to the Moon. Today we're talking about signature frameworks, whether it's a system, a process, a blueprint, a roadmap. A framework is something that sets your coaching business apart from all the rest. Because let's face it, so many of us work in an audience or a demographic or an industry where there's always going to be someone with a bigger budget or a bigger audience than you taking all your business. But a signature process or a framework is a way of letting them know that you mean business, that your coaching services deliver, and they can trust that your process will get them the results they need. It's also an incredible way to scale your business and make delivery easier. So how do we create our own signature framework? My guest today, Regina Huber, has created multiple and is here today to walk us through her own and also how to start creating a system for your business that sets you apart as an expert in a crowded niche or demographic. We also dig into how travel can broaden your experience both as a leader, as an entrepreneur, and how to create connections internationally to enhance your networks and your business. This is a really great podcast where we go deep on 3 or 4 questions rather than lots of quick fire answers. And I really enjoyed talking to Regina about some of the areas of the coaching space that I'm actually skeptical about, but she gave me incredible answers as to why I don't need to feel that way. So really great podcast today, guys. Regina Huber is here all the way from America, but as you'll learn, she's traveled extensively around the world. I really hope you enjoy this one because I certainly did. Regina Huber on Coaches to the Moon.
This is Coaches to the Moon, the only podcast you need to skyrocket your coaching business and create true impact on the world. Here's your host, Alex Morris.
Welcome back to the Coaches to the Moon podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We are going transatlantic today once again, heading all the way to Miami, Florida, where our guest Regina Huber is hanging out this week on her travels. So Regina is a leadership coach. She runs a company called Transform Your Performance, and she helps impact and value-driven leaders to step into the next level of their leadership with her signature frameworks and her breadth of experience traveling the world. We're here to talk today about how to create your own signature frameworks and also how to stand out in a competitive market, something we love to talk about. So Regina, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Alex. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I am so delighted to build a bridge across the ocean, all the way across the globe today. So it's a real pleasure, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Well, we have a bit of a few bridges built in my house already. So you said that you are originally from Germany, as is my wife's family. So we're very strongly connected to Germany. Whereabouts are you from?
Near Munich and not too far from the Austrian border, from Salzburg originally.
Beautiful.
Yes.
I love it. Munich is a city I've spent quite a bit of time in. Mostly when you travel from Australia to Munich, you just go there for the beer halls and for the Spanferkel. And it's a lot of fun, just having big joints of meat, massive dumplings, and just seeing, that night atmosphere over there. The nightlife in Munich was really fun. When did you move from Germany for the first time?
From Germany, I moved at 26, and that was to Spain. I moved to the big city of Madrid. Of course, I grew up in a tiny little village in Germany near the Austrian border, but I moved to Munich to study at 19, and then from there, 26, to Madrid, Spain. From there, I had the pleasure to travel to Lisbon in Portugal for quite a few years. Not right away, but after a few years, that was added on to my responsibility. And I had the opportunity to study and speak Portuguese, which was a lot of fun. And from there, the traveling really never ended. I was back in Germany for a little bit, for a couple of years at some point. But before that, I also traveled to Sao Paulo, Brazil for work and spent a half year there. And later on, I went back to Latin America, Argentina first, then the west coast of the United States, California, and then back to Argentina and Brazil again, and this time to Rio de Janeiro, and eventually to New York City, and that was in end of 2011, beginning of 2012, where I set foot again on this continent, and I've been here most of the time now, although also with little breaks. And last few years I've actually traveled quite a bit also on the African continent, which is very exciting to me.
So do you ever feel like you're not really making the most out of your life, Regina? Sounds like you're playing it safe a little bit. That's amazing.
Yeah.
What a story. What a story. That's did do you think that coming from a tiny little village kind of gave you that spark to get out and see the world?
Well, as you said, I'm very risk averse, right? Not at all. I've taken a ton of risks, and not all of them worked out as expected. But that such is life, and life gives us opportunities to grow and to learn. And sometimes they're not the most pleasant one, and at other times they are. It has definitely been a very exciting journey, very eclectic journey at the same time. And I do believe that it's true what you just asked me, that I lived in a very small world when I was a little girl. I was the shyest kid in the village, and I had big dreams though. And insatiable curiosity. That's something I've always had inside of me. It's actually my top leadership trait, as it turns out, as I learned through a test. That curiosity and that adventurous spirit that runs in one part of my family, I think definitely did their part.
Was that was from one of your parents, do you believe?
Yes, exactly. So my dad was very adventurous, but of course I grew up on a farm, right? And he couldn't always travel as much as he wanted, but he did go to Budapest from the village all the way to Budapest on his bike at the time, in a very simple bike. And he also made it down to Italy, pretty far down, not so far from Rome. So he was very happy also mountain climbing and hiking and skiing and all of that. And I also found out later that we had an extremely adventurous family member in that lineage, who actually climbed some of the highest mountains of the world himself. Well, the highest mountains that people have been on, let's just say, right? But and he even traveled all the way up from south to north, the entire Nile, from Rwanda, from Rwanda, Uganda, to all the way up to Egypt in a little boat. I found out about this just a few years ago, so definitely it's coming from somewhere.
I love that stuff. I love those stories, and especially when you find out something really cool about your lineage. My grandmother, my dad's mum, when she was about 16, she won Wimbledon. The tennis tournament. And so when she died, we found these scrapbooks that her family had made, and there were all these newspaper clippings of her as a famous tennis player in England. Obviously, back in 1936, there wasn't much money in tennis, that sort of thing. But when the war happened, she was like a poster boy for the women's front, and for the women learning to run the farms, that sort of thing. And she was a bit of a celebrity, and I didn't really know much about that when she was alive. So it was really, really cool. And I'm not very good at tennis, so obviously my family doesn't pass on traits as well as yours. So that's really, really cool. The Rwanda up the Nile, that's a really interesting one. And you said that you visited Africa yourself recently. How was that? And
Yes.
Firstly, why Africa? And then tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, I'm curious, as I said. I love learning about other cultures, about different types of music. I love African music. There's, of course, a huge variety of African music. It's, we say Africa, but it's a huge continent of 54 countries. I am particularly fond of Congolese music at this point, but I love many types of African music, and even played the djembe when I lived in Argentina. I was taking classes with a Senegalese guy. It was a lot of fun. I just really had this inkling all of a sudden. I traveled very extensively through Latin America, and of course also Europe. Haven't made it to Australia yet, which is sort of weird because I almost had an opportunity once, but then at the time I moved to Spain, so I missed out on that. But life is not over yet. And I've done a little work also in Asia, both remotely for coaching and in person in Qatar in the Middle East. But lately, my strongest interest really has been shifting towards Africa, because I have found so much richness in the culture. I know there's richness in any culture, of course, but we all have our affinities and they change over time sometimes, and right now it's that. So I got the opportunity to help prepare young women in Ghana for job interviews a few years back. And from there, I traveled directly to speak at a conference in Johannesburg, South Africa. Then I went back to Johannesburg and a few other parts of South Africa as well, but mostly Johannesburg several times to speak at conferences, and I always prolonged my stay, extended it, because I just wanted to stay longer. Dancing was also good. In Maboneng, I would stay in Maboneng, which is a very cool part of Johannesburg, which is sort of like, more the real Johannesburg, but recuperated. It's a combination of locals, artists, and also some tourists. And I really enjoyed my time there. So I spent about 5 months total probably in South Africa, counting all those different trips. And also eventually Cameroon. I co-hosted a couple of events in Cameroon. One was a big conference at a hotel. The other one, it was mostly for startups and young entrepreneurs. Some students were there as well. And then we did some smaller events at the same time. I was even invited to be on TV, on a TV show. It was like literally from the same day to the same day. I didn't know. They called me in the morning. I had done a radio show before, but then they called me, and that was fun. I got to dance even on TV, so really exciting experiences. Later, I went back to spend a couple of months both in Rwanda and Uganda. First, actually, Uganda, and from Uganda, I traveled to Rwanda. That was at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. I was supposed to go back to Rwanda in March already to speak at the convention center in Kigali, but that no longer happened because of the lockdowns. And I had planned a lot of other trips to Africa that year, and of course, it was all canceled. I was going to go to Kenya, back to South Africa. I had just signed a contract with Nigeria. I had done also some teaching in Sweden for Nigerian women a couple of years earlier, and so on. And it just, like, one thing came to the next. I built a lot of connections online, like the one in Uganda with this young man who has his own leadership institute, and we said, okay, I'm going, can I come and can we do something together? And he picked me up from the airport, and here I was. So yeah, it's just been a very amazing story. Last year I went to Zanzibar. That was actually not for work, it was just for the fun of it, but I also stayed an entire month, and then I was going to go somewhere else, but for personal reasons, I had to interrupt that trip. But anyway, it was just another really beautiful experience.
I bet. Wow, goodness me, I've got so many questions. One, which I'm going to mention so I don't forget it. So the next thing I'll ask you, Regina, is how did you find yourself all these conferences, events, and connections internationally? Because that's a really interesting thing I'd love to know about. But firstly, on a more personal note, you've been in business for a long time. You obviously created a level of success. A lot of these places you're talking about visiting are very developing nations, and there's obviously a really huge disparity between the haves and the have-nots in these countries. What sort of insights and feelings are you getting from seeing the way people live in these very, very simple nations, and do you think that has an effect on your actions as an entrepreneur?
Yes. So, there are also misconceptions around some places in Africa, right? Because they're, like Kigali, for example, is one of the, It's one of the cleanest cities I've seen, right? And yes, if you move out of the capital and out of, into the countryside, it's a very simple life for a lot of people. But I do believe also, when you go to South Africa or to even I can't wait to go to Abidjan, for example, in Ivory Coast, because I think this is just an amazing city from what I see, and all the possibilities there are in those cities. So I think it's just more. You learn how to move in different environments. For example, Kampala and Kigali, they are so close together. Rwanda, Uganda, or rather the other way around, right? Uganda is Kampala. But the two cities couldn't be more different in a way, because of different habits of people, different customs, different rules, so to speak. Like, for example, in Kigali, you won't see people eating in the street, and in Uganda, there are all these little booths with food, and it's just totally the opposite. It's so exciting to observe this, and there are places, of course, that are a little bit harder to move in, just because we're not used to it. I did, for example, take collective taxis in Yaoundé in Cameroon, but because my GPS wasn't working there, my phone didn't have reception in that city outside of Wi-Fi area, so I never really knew where I was and how long it would take to get from one place to the next when I took such a taxi, but it was just a really great experience. You never know who's next to be dropped off, and you have no orientation, of course, the first time you travel there. And it was, of course, very, very much the same when I first arrived in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, or the very first time in Sao Paulo, which is an even much bigger city. But over time, when you spend time there, you figure it out. I think it's just like, it's just different. We are used, we are used to different ways of living, and one is not necessarily better than the other, right? I believe that we can learn so much. And yes, you said simple, I think, Alex. I believe that simple is what we can learn the most from. I always say simple is good, even in the coaching approach or in coaching techniques or tools. When they are simple, we do them. So simple is good. And I think a lot of that also applies to life. Sometimes we overcomplicate and we don't even notice how indoctrinated we are and how mind-controlled we are and how conditioned. And traveling really opens up our minds to other ways of thinking, other ways of living.
Oh, for sure.
I don't know if that answers your question in any way.
Absolutely. No, I'm always interested in this sort of thing because I've traveled a lot when I was younger, and then haven't so much since I had my daughters. They just turned 3, so I haven't done that much traveling lately outside of 2 hours away from Sydney, Australia. And so I'm always interested because I've got staff around the world, and I always feel a real responsibility to use the pure luck that I was born into a comfortable country to actually to make some impact in the rest of the world. But an interesting thing that I think you mentioned in your answer was that in moving to all these different countries and spending some time in so many different environments, you have given yourself probably a greater capacity to deal with uncomfortable situations and to be a bit of a social chameleon, talk to all sorts of different people. And moving into your leadership coaching, that must be another invaluable trait, the ability to adapt and improvise and talk to and work with lots of different people. So I would love to start talking about your leadership coaching and your frameworks. But firstly, one I think that people will be very interested in is how on earth do you hook up a conference on another continent? How is that an opportunity you set yourself up for so often?
Yes, and as you said, it's always also an opportunity to learn from others, right? But yes, the way I did this is basically look online, connect with people. Once I'm there, I of course get introduced to more people, and I also write for magazines in Africa occasionally. I write for magazines in the US too, but when I get an offer to write an article and I can fit it in, I will always say yes, because that gives me some credibility. If I have an article published in a magazine in Cameroon, or one publication is going to come out now, it's actually a pretty important publication soon in Zimbabwe, and now in the fall, then that gives me credibility in that area, right, in that country, or at least on the continent. I did reach out to people, of course, on LinkedIn as well, and just really connect with them and start a conversation. It's part when you start a conversation and listen to people and show interest in what they do. I think that
makes sense. What's up, guys? Alex here. If you're enjoying the episode, please don't forget to give us a subscribe on whatever channel or platform you're watching or listening to this. Really helps us to make an amazing show every week. Thank you so much. Back to the episode. I mean, fancy that, just starting conversations, and often it can be really one connection that changes everything, right? A snowball effect where their audience brings you to a new one, and that referral effect where everything just grows, and suddenly you find yourself dancing on TV in the Congo or in Senegal, which is really, really interesting. Okay, sweet. So thank you so much for indulging my questions about your travels. I'm really interested in it, and I can't help as the host but to be a little bit selfish in asking questions I want to ask. But I would now love to talk about your work a lot more. So just I gave a brief description in the intro. As you're a leadership coach, you help impact and value-driven leaders to step into their next levels. Could you give us just your little elevator pitch for what you do, just to refresh people's minds, please?
Yes, I help employees and mostly leaders at all levels to reach their next career goal and to improve their leadership skills, depending on what their specific situation is. I always like to say also everything is in the end about more freedom. We all want more freedom of sorts, whether it's more financial freedom, more emotional freedom, more freedom from stress, or freedom to show up authentically and powerfully, and to know how to do that, or freedom to show our brilliance so we can apply it in our work. So, and that's why whatever my clients' goals are, I always try to give them also a piece of freedom. Whether they may realize that or in that moment or not, I always smuggle in a piece of freedom. I think that's really, really important. And I have a very holistic approach to coaching because of my very eclectic experience on the one hand, but also because of my holistic studies, my multicultural background, of course. And my clients do not just want a promotion or just want to improve their leadership skills. They also want better quality of life, less stress, more fulfillment, and they want to know that their work has a positive impact and all the good stuff. Yes, we tend to compartmentalize our lives a lot, but it's really one whole, and it's like one entity. It's not just divided into health and wealth and family or work. It's all one, and that's why I believe in a holistic approach. it's a holistic phenomenon in our life, right? And so many clients who call me initially to improve their leadership skills or reach their next career goal, they also entrust me with a lot of personal stuff, because in the end it all fits together. And when we address many different aspects, and when people really are open-minded, when clients open up and they see how it's all one big puzzle, I think that's when they actually can create the biggest change for themselves and also for their teams. And I always like to say leadership starts with self. And that's also why I created my 2 leadership frameworks, with the first being or having a very, very strong focus on self. Although you can then, once you master it, you can also convey to your team, not only because of who you are now. It's not that you become somebody different, of course. The goal of transformation is always to show the best version of ourselves, right? And to be that person and embody that. And so, of course, that alone already has a big impact on your team. But once you also understand the framework, you can also take it to your team and teach them some pieces of it.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about that, because most people in the coaching space that I'm in are either solopreneurs. They're running their business themselves. They are the face of the business. They're doing the marketing, the sales, the delivery. Some of them are moving into having smaller teams, 1 to 3 sort of virtual assistants, maybe some contractors, maybe some freelancers, salespeople, marketers. And then myself, I've got about sort of 13 or 14 different contractors working between part-time and full-time for me right now. And so leadership's a really interesting one, and I experience it very, very close up in my own business at the moment, and in my family as well, being that now I've suddenly got 2 toddlers running around the house who I have to keep alive and healthy on the outside of myself. Yes. So leadership's really interesting. And you mentioned frameworks. So signature frameworks is a really interesting part of marketing. But before we get on to the marketing side of it, you've got 2 signature frameworks which you've created: the Powerful Leadership Transformation, PLT, and the New Paradigm Leadership, NPL, not to be confused with NLP. So could you possibly take us through both of these frameworks, maybe which one would come first, which one would come second, if there's such a thing? Yeah, just walk us through PLT and NPL, please.
Yes, absolutely. I created the PLT first, the Powerful Leadership Transformation. It's the underlying principle, or principles, I should say, of all my coaching. Although in a coaching program, we might not go in sequence, but we use a lot of the materials as they are relevant to my clients, because my one-on-one coaching programs are, of course, 100% customized. Now, when I do workshops like the one in Rwanda, I taught a 4-day workshop where we went through the entire PLT in much detail with a group of young entrepreneurs there. But in a coaching program, I really just use everything that is valuable and relevant for that individual client. Yeah, so I don't go through a completely pre-designed coaching program with my clients, because that's not how I approach coaching. Just to make the difference clear. Now, the Powerful Leadership Transformation has 4 pillars. Okay. The first pillar is called Self-Empowering Mindset and Heart Set. And initially it was just the mindset, but then I added the heart set because I believe that they go together. I like to say no one can empower you but yourself. So you will never hear me say I empowered somebody. I can help them guide. I can help them find a way. I can guide them to empower themselves and give them resources, but the power is already inside of them. That's at least how I see it. And everything you need to be successful is in your mind and in your heart. And hence the self-empowering mindset and heart set. because yes, the mindset is key. Everybody talks about mindset, and I like to go really deep with it when it's important for the client. But our mind can be much more effective when it's led by the heart, and when mind and heart are in coherence, then we tend to be at our best. Now, when your heart and mind are in co-creation, you will be able to use the power of both. The intellectual power of the mind on the one hand, right? Although we also have, of course, a distinction between the conscious mind and the subconscious, which is more the conditioning, which is also very strongly represented in the body, right? So we're not going to go into all the details of this today, I guess, but also on the other hand or on the other side of the coin of this intellectual power of the mind, we have this very you-specific wisdom that is unique to you because of what you have lived, your experiences, your stories. And that's this wisdom that you have gathered in your heart and stored in your heart. And it's based on your unique experiences and stories. So we also nowadays know that the heart is a part of the brain, actually, with 40,000 brain-like cells, and the magnetic field of the heart can be up to 5,000 times stronger than the magnetic field of the head brain. And this is really important to remember. We connect with the people around us and the world around us through our hearts. And there's a lot more to the heart.
I'll stop you on that one because I'm really interested in this part, because this is something that in the sort of coaching, personal development space, people talk about magnetizing, manifestation, all this sort of thing. And a lot of people do say that the magnetic pull of your heart is well, like you said, 5,000 times more powerful than that of the brain. Now, I am famously, as we talk about on the show all the time, quite a rejecter of personal development mantras, just because whenever I tried them, the more I tried to do, the less success I had in every area of my life. And so I'm always interested in, I'm not cynical at all, I'm just skeptical and love to ask, what does that mean? The magnetic pull of the heart, for me, is just an organ that pumps blood. But for what does that mean for you? Because I'm really interested in the heart set and its power to attract things into our life.
Yeah, so actually the heart can survive a few seconds without the head brain. So, it can even function a little bit without that. So just an interesting detail, right? But so the heart, we actually call it a magnetic monopole, right? Because what it does, it emanates this magnetic, I don't want to call it radiation because it has a bad connotation, right? But it was just like this magnetic frequency, and it turns around us and it comes back in. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And the Heart Math Institute has done a lot of research on heart coherence, on the difference it makes. For example, when you think of gratitude, when you think of love, when you think of compassion or peace, like these positive emotions, yes, or feelings, that's when you actually change your energy. Right, and I'm a big believer in the energy piece and how it all plays together. It's not separate. We just compartmentalize a little bit so that we can understand it and put it into words better. But we do say, for example, that courage is in the heart, fear is in the mind. That's something that I clearly can distinguish. When you really take the time to connect with your heart. And it's not for nothing that we say, listen to your heart. There are all these different expressions. Even the word courage, cœur, courage, in French, for example, they come from the same root, right? There's a reason for all of this. Etymology is so interesting in that sense. So it's a huge chapter, of course. We could go into much more detail, but if people are more interested, I do suggest that they look maybe into the Heart Math Institute that has research, right? So it's not just, okay, I've observed this or I'm saying this. No, there's research, right?
Great. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, because that's always always what it comes down to is, yeah, for me, is this a scientific thing or is it just something that people say?
Yeah.
And I know far too many people who are very successful and attribute so much of it to things like energy and, you know, magnetization, that it's difficult to ignore. So I'm always really interested in everyone's experiences of it. And for you mentioning the connection between cœur, the French word for heart, and courage, that's really a nice little insight that we can only get from a polylingual person like yourself. It's five and a
Well,
half
you have
languages.
that in, yeah, you have that in many languages, by the way, in Portuguese, in Spanish, even the old word in German for courageous, it is beherzt, and in German heart is Herz.
Oh,
We
okay.
don't say that anymore. We say mutig or something, you know, but the word exists, right?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I love it, and what a massive part of leadership. Okay. So, I we were talking about the self-empowering mindset and heart set that's involved in your PLT, in your
Yeah.
PLT framework.
The first pillar.
Yeah, that was the first pillar. Can we get through the next three pillars?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's
And I
go.
know we only have limited time, so I'm going to do
You're
this a
okay.
bit faster. But I
That's
think
okay.
it's
I'll
just
ask a lot of
important to
questions.
make that distinction, right? Yes. So the second pillar is distinctive uniqueness. Again, it has two sides there are two sides of the coin. On the one side, there's your unique brilliance and genius, and on the other side, there's the shortcomings and how to address them, right? We all have room for growth, to say it in a simple way. But it's also very important, on the other hand, to learn how to know, own, and show your value so that you can stand out and be extraordinary as a coach, distinguish yourself, you know, as the coach you are, not some other coach, because there are so many coaches and we are all unique. So how do you do that, right? You want to know how to show your brilliance, but also how to express it in your work, and how to bring it into your brand, for example. And of course, I help my clients do the same in their careers. And then the third pillar is a body and energy conscious presence. You've probably heard of Amy Cuddy and her power posing. She talks about the body part of it, but of course, energy and body are, again, not separate. You know, we talk about them separately, but they are. They work together, just as our mind and our spirit. It all works together. It's all one.
Is that the lady from the TED Talk, power posing?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I used
yeah.
to really like that when I was coming up in business and feeling very insecure about myself. When I'd be doing a sales call in my bedroom, doing a power pose, that sort of thing. So yeah, but you're adding another level to that for energy presence as well.
Yeah, and I love power dancing. There was an article with me talking about this in Forbes once, just because I love dance, right? But everybody chooses what works for them. I put a lot of those tools into my book, Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine, which, by the way, is another way to build your brand, right? Because I figured that these tools that I needed so badly in the past, and I still use, could be useful for other people as well. But also, apart from the body conscious, and that then reflects back into your energy, and by the way, also into your presence. It's not just for your confidence. It's not just the internal thing, Alex. It also helps you enhance your presence as a speaker, or on a sales call when you're also a speaker, by the way, right? Or on a podcast, it doesn't really matter. And it's all about being fully present in your body, taking maybe a few deep belly breaths, which calms us down, has a physiological effect that tranquilizes us, but doesn't make us fall asleep. It actually increases our mental focus at the same time, because it oxygenates our brains. And there's so much we can do with some very simple exercises. And the energy conscious is really important to me, because we don't talk enough about it in business, I believe. You know, we always talk about those 7 seconds when we have 7 seconds to make a first impression. You've probably heard that, Alex, right? I mean, a lot of people talk about that. But it's actually within 0.07 seconds that our brains figure out whether we can trust someone. And that has to do with our energy. So before even start talking, our energy already speaks louder and faster than our words. And we constantly communicate on an energetic level, whether we are aware of this or not. This is really interesting, right? So our energy has a very significant role in trust building, in business presence, in leadership presence, executive presence, whatever we want to call it. And it helps us enhance our perceived presence when we know how to optimize it. And sometimes a simple tool is enough. And sometimes, we do it with more practice over time. It's not so much about the quantity of energy you have, but about the quality of energy, right? For example, today, before this podcast, I went to a yoga class under the palm trees, super nice outside. And there was a yoga teacher, and she was a sub-teacher. She's not the regular. And she came up to me afterwards, and she said something about my energy that she picked up, right? And I said, wow, this is really beautiful. So we started talking. But there's something that you cannot quite explain sometimes. Just pick it up. And sometimes we also pick it up from somebody at a networking event. All of a sudden, somebody comes through the door and we notice that person. And everybody notices that person, but we don't know exactly why. Yes? And they haven't even said a word, and it's not necessarily that they are wearing something flamboyant or whatever. It's just because of their energy. And so I think we do have an edge when we really know how to manage our energy a little bit more wisely, Yeah, and we could speak a bit more of it in business. It would be useful, I believe. And I teach my clients, and they do have advantages, or all of a sudden they feel more secure about speaking up in meetings or whatever it is. They get the deal more easily because they build trust more easily and things like that. And then the fourth pillar is, of course, inspired and effective action, because without action nothing much happens. We also have to take action, of course. But it's more like the inspired action is also aligned action, and the aligned comes from the other three pillars of the powerful leadership transformation.
Great. So much of your coaching, 75% of your coaching, in fact, is actually preparing people for the action, not just taking the action. And that's a really great thing for people to remember, I think, is that, especially in the early days, everyone wants to just get results immediately, but there's such a big foundation you've got to set and figure out what parts of your business and yourself are valuable to other people before you start taking that action, especially when you get into marketing, which is something I'd love to talk to you about now quickly. In my space, the digital marketing space, everyone wants to just turn on some ads now, launch something, figure something out. But not everyone's ready to do that because they don't have the foundations. And in terms of the first three parts of your framework there, mindset, uniqueness, energy, and conscious presence, I can see a lot of things in there that actually transcend across to marketing. In terms of uniqueness, is something that you mentioned. You have a holistic approach. You're in a competitive space, teaching people leadership, and then also building that trust and doing that in a way that not only helps you in social, but in business situations as well. So the uniqueness part of it is really cool, because your frameworks that you've created in themselves, that is creating a very unique selling point for you as a coach, having your own signature frameworks. So was that in your mind when you created them? And also, has it helped you, and how has it helped you, I suppose, to separate yourself from the pack in a market where everyone's trying to teach someone how to succeed in their career?
It was on my mind when I created them, and I think it had several, I created them for several different reasons, of course. First of all, it is good to have some structure, especially also when you write about things. It's just for you to structure your own thoughts a bit more in your own mind as well. And it's even not just for my clients, although it's mainly for them. It's also for me because, of course, for the brand, but also for clarity finding for myself. What do I really want to most focus on as a coach? Yes, I also teach all the leadership content and anything that is really relevant to the person. Unless it's not a good fit, then I'm not going to be their coach, right? But I believe that when you build something that is yours and you put it into your own words, I didn't just copy the names of these 4 pillars. I've put a lot of thought into them. Self-empowering mindset and heart set might sound very general to you, but and then it goes on to distinctive uniqueness. I don't think everybody talks about that. I think not a lot of people talk about body and energy conscious presence. So I put a lot of thought into those terms because they had to make sense to me, first of all. And then I can write about these topics now. I can talk about it on videos. I can do all these different things with it, all the multi-purposing of marketing. And then with the new paradigm leadership, some of it overlaps with the powerful leadership transformation, of course, because it always will have a piece of the mindset in it. For example, it will always have some trust building. I also added conversational intelligence as part of my studies to my coaching practice, because that I felt that was a piece that was missing a little bit, the verbal component in it all, and how do we use language to trust build and to navigate more successfully through team conversations, through negotiations and all of that, because I also built another framework which is not based on leadership, which is more based on, for example, salary negotiations. Yes, so it's a different focus, but I built a whole online course around this because I noticed that a lot of people needed it, but of course it also has the mindset in it, because without that you cannot powerfully negotiate. Now, in the new paradigm leadership, then you have again the mind. Here I call it not self-empowering mindset and heart set. I just call it mind. It's a very simple graphic that I created with 4 puzzle pieces, and they're called mind, message, trust, and heart. The mind here, again, is because mindset impacts all we do. It determines our vision, our drive, what we can achieve, and all of that. You know that very well. And I think most people do. Then the message is, not about only the verbal component. It's about the body language, and it's about, everything, how we show up, as who we show up. What do we communicate through how we show up? Because whether we speak or not, messages are always transmitted. And trust is so important in leadership because it's the glue that bonds and holds teams together, right? It allows for creativity to flow, all of that. And then heart has a twofold meaning here, actually. It's the same as we talked about before, so I'm not going to repeat all that. But the other meaning of the heart here in this particular framework is people are the heart of the organization. And I want them to be seen as such. I talk a lot about, in this context, also about humanizing the workplace, because I believe that, when we upgrade our consciousness in business to one of love, compassion, and co-creation, we can also improve the bottom line.
100%. I massively agree. I do my best in my own workplace, even though my team is all working remotely. I do my best in that one as well. So you've created 2 of these signature frameworks. Seems like a really, really, I know we've created multiple over our time as well. And I know a lot of my friends and clients do the same thing. If one of our coaches listening knows how they want to help someone, but they're struggling to stand out, how would you suggest that they go about creating their own signature framework?
First of all, I think observe yourself and how you have best helped people, because you might not have a whole lot of experience yet, but most people know why they want to do what they do, and if they don't, they should maybe get a journal and a pen and journal on it. and just really reflect on it and start with that. Yeah, why do you do what you do as a coach? For most of us, it's because of some personal story, right? Or some personal experience or some special preparation. Maybe we were very successful executive leaders and we want to help others do the same, right? Or we have learned a lot through a family business and we want to help others, or whatever it is. But so I believe we just need to gain clarity on who we want to help and how we want to help them first, and then figure out, okay, what's the best way and how can I best communicate this? And it's a process. It doesn't have to be set in stone right from the beginning. You know, I added the heart set after a while. It wasn't there in the beginning, for example. And over time, we will also then refine the content. But I believe that when you say, okay, it has 3 pillars or 4, whatever it is, whatever it has, right? Just decide which ones are important to you and what they should be called, but first of all, what they should include before you maybe come up with the terminology. I think always a brainstorming comes first. And even also your own vision. Now, once maybe you have a pretty clear vision in your mind of what you want to do with your coaching business, then maybe start with that. Write that down. I'm a total believer in a written vision. A lot of people only have it in their minds, and that's when we don't have enough clarity.
Yeah. Well, that's a that's a tough one when you're just starting out, right? To know where it can go, especially as things develop so quickly. I know my weekly or my monthly goals are constantly changing, constantly depending on how many people we've brought in that month, if I have a new team or not, what's happening in my personal life. It's really, really interesting. But I think, yeah, from both a delivery standpoint, helping your clients and giving them the best experience possible, having your own signature process is amazing. And then, like we spoke about from a marketing point of view, it really sets you apart. And I know that's something that is not easy, but that's a really, really good insight in your method, almost your framework on how to create a framework. Really, really interesting stuff. And like we've been on for nearly an hour now, Regina. So
Wow.
yeah, I know, right? And I'm sure it's getting very late there for you. It's almost bedtime, I'm sure, over in Miami, Florida. So I suppose before we go, what's your plan? You know, what's your plan? You talk about having written goals, setting and really knowing where you're headed. Where are you headed right now? What's going on for you for the next couple of years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So location-wise, I'm actually just in between chairs a little bit again. It tends to happen every 7 or 3.5 years for me. I don't know. There's something with 7 and 3.5 that always magically something changes, and if I don't go with it, then I'm forced to.
Right. Yeah.
So we'll see what comes from that. But business-wise, yes. I also have, my other marketing tools, of course, career growth strategies newsletter on LinkedIn. I keep doing all of those, some videos here and there. I have a YouTube channel and all of that. But in sort of in the bigger picture, I do want to keep coaching my one-on-one coaching clients. That's definitely always on my mind, and always something I want to do, but also hope, and I shouldn't use that word, I trust that a leadership summit is coming about soon in Zimbabwe. I'm looking forward to that. It's again, it's not 100% confirmed yet, and the timing is still a little bit in the air, but it seems like it might happen end of September, beginning of October. That would be one taught by me during 2 days, so very exciting. I also work with an agency where I teach online from time to time. I have a great new virtual session that I created for a financial firm recently, which I would like to also market to more companies because it got really great feedback and reviews. People thought it was impactful, so I of course want to bring that to more people. I do want to do more online speaking again. That is very exciting to me. I love the in-person speaking. Actually, sorry. Yes, it is getting a little late. It's been a long day. So the in-person, I want to do more of that again.
Yeah.
And of course also keep the online at the same time, the virtual speaking and teaching, because it keeps me mobile. And that's also something important to me, because I just really love to travel and do work in other places too, and have that freedom and that possibility to stay on, longer, not just go for 2 days maybe. So that's something. There's a few more things in the works that are still a little confidential, but that's.
I'll bet there are. It sounds like that's the kind of person you are. It's always a lot of things up your sleeve, a lot of opportunities and experiences on the way, and sounds like you really have built a business around the way you love to live, and you're creating freedom in your own sense, which is something that you mentioned, one of your top values as well. So really interesting stuff today, Regina. I know that we talked about at the beginning of the show how much stuff we dig into, and we only touched on some of it because we went quite deep on a lot of it, but really, really fun. And I've learned a lot about stuff I wasn't expecting to talk about. The heart's magnetization, how people live over in various parts of Africa, and my own misconceptions. It's been really, really great, and I can't thank you enough for spending your evening with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and always remember, no one can empower you but yourself, and all I do is really in the service of freedom. You got that absolutely right, Alex, so that's what I like to say. Thank you so much again for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Great. Well, we do our very best here, and I do hope that this podcast will help some of our listeners to empower themselves as well. Regina's book is, I wrote it down, it is Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine. What a message we can all use more in our lives. All the links for anything will be above, to the side, or below this video or podcast, depending on where you're listening or watching. I'll be back next week with 2 more amazing guests on Coaches to the Moon. Until then, thank you so much for listening. Much love and peace out. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. If you love our guests, then in the show notes of this episode, you can find their socials, you can follow them, you can learn more about all the free resources and programs they've got. I highly recommend you do it. Until then, thank you so much. I'll be back here next week with Coaches to the Moon. Have an amazing day. Peace out.
Coaches to the Moon will be back next week. Until then, reach us on Facebook at To The Moon Digital Marketing.